Okay, so what are we going to be talking about today? That is going to be something I think that is really important and something we need to do more in life, and thanks to, unfortunately, the distractions of the modern world, we're probably not doing enough. And that is reading. So, why do I think it's important? Well, I think we all know why it's important. I think there's endless reasons, but just to name, I think a few right off the top of the bat, it would be it improves your vocabulary and your ability to express yourself with the language that you use. And I think that can kind of alter your ability to kind of perceive your reality around you, because a lot of people, when they talk about, they're sad or they're depressed or something like that, I feel like that's really just not using the right words, and they just kind of go over to a very extreme example of that emotion, where instead they could say they're a little bit sad or a little bit blue, whereas opposed to, depressed is a very charged word to say. So I think reading helps in that capacity, where it expands your vocabulary so you can find these very nuanced words to kind of express yourself. And then another angle which I think is really important, and especially in this modern day with all the distractions, is it centers your focus very well, because you have to be able to follow from kind of one point to the next and not kind of get distracted or lose your way. Otherwise, it kind of falls apart. So the next thing I kind of want to talk about is my journey with reading. And initially, throughout my life, I hadn't really done much reading. Maybe up to the end of my university degree, I probably read 10 books in my life, and that's including ones that were prescribed to me through high school and stuff like that, and throwing in a few from childhood, like Cat in the Hat, which doesn't really count, but here we go. But around about the age of around about 21, 22, I started to fall into reading as just kind of a habit. It started out very slowly, and when we get to the end of this video, I'll kind of explain similar kind of thing, is I would go about trying to read only a few pages at a time, every day. I'd try to read maybe 4 or 5 pages, because I was always of the mindset that I was never going to read if I wanted to learn something. There would have been, my mentality was there'd be a YouTube video or a documentary or some sort of other kind of form or medium that I could kind of use to get that information. But now, coming to see the benefits of reading books, I've realized that it kind of is that old thing with the old Harry Potter fans when those movies were coming out. You could tell the difference between who had read the book and who hadn't, because the people coming out of the movie theater, those that hadn't read the book, were like, "Oh yeah, that was pretty good. That was mad." But then you had the people that had read the book, and because the book has just so much more time to engross you in that world and that universe, the people that came out who had read the book were always disappointed, because they were like, "Oh, well, they missed this detail and they didn't include that." And it's just because when it comes down to a video content and a movie, you've only got 2 hours, so you really need to advance things really quickly. So a lot of that stuff kind of falls along the wayside. And it's the same with books when it comes to non-fiction, where you can watch a video or look at a documentary, but actually reading a book about it has so much more information that would never fit and wouldn't make the cut when it comes to kind of video content or another form of content, even if it's something like a podcast. And seeing how I've touched on that point, I want to kind of look at the difference between non-fiction, fiction, and where my kind of thoughts lie on those and what I think you should be kind of reading. So I will say right off the bat, I am a big supporter of non-fiction over fiction when it comes to the majority of your reading. I'm not going to say that you can't ever read fiction and that's something you should never look at. I just view it as something that you kind of have to keep a distance from, almost with a 10-foot pole, because it's very radioactive is the way I view it, is because it's designed to just kind of be a page turner. You just kind of get lost in someone else's story, and people will say, "Oh, but reading those stories, I get to understand character motives and the human experience and things like that." But then I always am kind of faced with the dilemma that maybe if you just read a non-fiction book on psychology or human dynamics, you'd actually probably would get even more information and knowledge about what you're trying to study, if it be a case study or a kind of typical social trait. I think you can get more information that way and get different information on a range of different things from a non-fiction book as opposed to a fiction. So I tend to lean towards non-fiction, and I think you should too, because another reason is that nonfiction is kind of like a recipe book or like condensed knowledge. So essentially, people will spend their entire career or even just their whole lifetime just uncovering these certain things about a field or a profession or just a observation about life itself. And then that book, in the space of 200 to 300 pages, they're essentially giving you all the answers, everything they've learned over their lifetime in the space of this 300, 200, 300 page book. And they're just saying, take this information, use it. So, this has taken me a lifetime. It might only take you a few hours to read this and it could change your life. So that's why I view nonfiction in that light as being more transformative for your own development over something that's fiction, just because I feel like it just doesn't have the same impact as nonfiction does. Now, I do have a bunch of books that I do want to kind of like share with you for different reasons. Some of them are just kind of to explain how I started and what got me into it, and then others are more like I recommend everyone should read these certain books. So let's start off with the first one. This is Long and Short: Confessions of a Portfolio Manager. So this was the first book I kind of ever wrote. No, sorry, not ever wrote. God, I'm not that good of an investor. But it's the first one I ever read because when I was in university, I was doing a finance degree and I had it in my mind at the time that, wanted to be like, on the, Wall Street, well, not Wall Street, but like, some hotshot investor making lots of money, that would be cool, right? Because I was just a, dumb young guy. So I thought that'd be the way to go about it. But I didn't really have any knowledge or experience in the field, so that kind of did shoot me in the foot. But then I remember going to a seminar that an ex-graduate from my university, kind of had been asked to come and, give his thoughts on things. And he recommended picking up this book because he said it really kind of gets you in the right mindset and focuses you on a kind of smarter investment strategy. Because what you see in media, especially with things like The Wolf of Wall Street, it seems like a very toxic culture where it's, I win, you lose, you win, I lose kind of thing. It's like a zero-sum game, but there actually are strategies that you can kind of involve and incorporate that actually, as long as you're willing to wait and take the 20 to 30 years, you're pretty much guaranteed profits or guaranteed, returns. And it's kind of exposing that kind of myth and showing that it's not all about just, huge risks and huge rewards. It actually is a more consistent strategy. And when I picked this book up, I thought it'd be really hard because, you think it's a business, finance book. It must be, for really smart people, really full of jargon. But the reality is it's not. And when we open the book, the first thing we kind of notice is we've got a bunch of wasted page space with just empty space and giant font. Because the reality is when it comes to these types of books, they're designed for business executives or, business type people who, might be on a flight from LA to Washington for 3 or 4 hours, and so they need something to read, and so you can knock that over pretty quickly and get a huge amount of information and knowledge from that. So that's what these kind of business books are designed for. And when I started to pick them up and read them, I realized actually how easy they were. So when I first started my kind of journey on the whole reading front, I ended up reading 2 or 3 of them before I actually kind of moved on to other topics, just because they were so easily digestible. And I feel like I got a lot out of it. And still today, a lot of the teachings and principles I've learned from that book, actually I still apply today, and I still kind of inform my belief when it comes to finances and stuff like that. Now, the next book I kind of want to talk about, which I think this is a must read, because this will teach you, I think, everything you'll ever need to know about, finding the profession you need, or trying to find your purpose. Or at least it should complement everything you've kind of got going on and what you already know. So this is Mastery by Robert Greene. Now, Robert Greene has written a bunch of other books like The 48 Laws of Power, The Laws of Human Nature, I think The 33 Strategies of War, and some other ones as well. And pretty much anything that man writes is just gold. But this project here, this book, Mastery, came out as a consequence of writing his other books. Because, he does all of this research, on both, the historical characters, historical people that appear in his writings that kind of inform the principles he's trying to teach and stuff. But what he found was, through writing all those books and doing all that research, he found that the people that were successful in life and the people that got ahead or did something of note or significance in their time, they kind of seem to follow a very similar path of, dedicating themselves to a skill or a profession of some sort. And And like by dedicating, I don't mean for like a year or two or like a couple months. I'm talking years, if not decades, sometimes their entire lifetimes trying to chase the perfection and chase the, constantly refining their skills and improving. And pretty much this book is just about explaining all these strategies that the people used and just the general overall flow that you go from kind of like novice apprentice to kind of like an intermediate level, and then you hit the mastery stage where really the profession starts to, or the skill kind of opens up to you, where you've done all the grunt work, you've done all the, the hard stuff and all the, down in the trenches time, like work, but now you're at the peak of like your field. And so now you can experiment with the structures and overall direction of your field, and you can kind of be a kind of trendsetter when it comes to, where that's heading. And, very few people do reach mastery in their skill or in their profession. But what he's saying is that a lot of people kind of make excuses for that. They just say that, this person is naturally talented, or this person just got a lucky break. And don't get me wrong, those two things do happen, but those lucky breaks or that natural talent is never enough to, fully capture mastery, because those things fall off. If someone's naturally talented, they might be a naturally talented swimmer or something like that, but if they never train, they're going to stay at that same level. But if you have someone who's not a good swimmer, but is training every single day for years, if not decades, do you think at one point they're eventually going to, eclipse the person that has that natural talent? Of course they are. And, same thing with, the lucky break. It's like, luck comes and goes. So, like, if you're just going to say, oh, well, that person just got everything in life because they were lucky, it's like, yeah, and it'll get taken away too. But the thing that stays is your knowledge and your mastery of your, skill sets and your profession. So that can never be taken away from you. So, like I said, fortune comes and goes, but your wisdom stays. So let's move on to the next one, because I thought I'd hit us with a non-fiction, but I thought I'd also hit us with a fiction one too, because, like I said, I'm not fully against fiction, but I think you should be reading good fiction. And by good fiction, usually Russian fiction. So what I got here is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. Now, this was the first Dostoevsky book I'd ever read, and I was never sure if I was going to read this, because I looked at it, like I said, I'd never read a book before, and when I picked this thing up and just saw how, thick it is and how tiny the font is, I was like, there's no way I'm going to be the kind of person that finishes this. But just like I said, slowly, day by day, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there on the train, I eventually got it done, and I'm not going to spoil the details or, any of the story plot points. There are highs and lows, ups and downs, moments you want to cry at, moments you're going to laugh at. It's got it all, really. And the reason why I think this type of fiction is better as opposed to some of the other kind of, trash out of there is it looks at the human dynamics like other fiction does, but it does it in a very kind of grounded way, and it looks and observes the kind of moral stagnation that can arise in the modern world. It uses the world that he knew, but you can see there are, almost comparisons that you could make today. And it's kind of very eye-opening, because it shows you that maybe you're not as good as you think you are. And maybe you're willing to do some bad stuff for seemingly good reasons and good intentions. And it plays on that idea very well. And for that, I think you should pick up this book. It is a bit of a long read, but I think at the end of it, once you put it down, you will agree with me when you think that this is a good book. But I will give you one piece of advice. Do not read the epilogue. The epilogue in this book ruins it, in my opinion. It's so weird. It ends on such a nice little, ta-da moment, where it all just lines up. And then you get this, maybe 30-page epilogue, which kind of just draws the story out for no reason and doesn't really add anything, and you're like, okay. So do yourself a favor, read the book but not the epilogue, because, well, for reasons I just stated. Now, next book. We were talking about how fiction kind of informs social dynamics and how people work and stuff like that. But I think a non-fiction book that does a lot better is Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. Why it can matter more than IQ. So this book, just to tell a quick side story, is I was reading this book when I was just about to join close contact tracing with New South Wales Health, and man, did this help me so much, because it's not just learning to manage your own emotions and finding out where those emotions come from and how to deal with them in kind of a positive light. It also teaches you how to deal with other people's emotional outbursts and rage and all sorts of different ranges of emotion that they can display, which might have an impact on you, your performance, or even just your own mental state. This book goes a long way to explaining strategies and skills and techniques you can use to kind of mitigate the negative effects other people can have on you. So just because they're in a bad vibe, bad energy, that doesn't mean it has to come onto you. And I remember one call I was doing for close contact tracing. Essentially, a woman had been called up. Her son was a close contact. He called his mom to say, I'm a close contact. What do I do? And then her boss overheard that phone call and then was yelling at her, being like, "You're bringing COVID into our business place. You're gonna kill us all." And he apparently threw the filing cabinets on the floor and was yelling at her, "Get out." So as you can imagine, she's pretty distraught at this moment and she's not in a good mood. So she calls us up, or calls New South Wales Close Contact Tracing, and is like, "You're trying to get my son arrested, yada yada yada, and then look what you've done, you've caused this problem with me, and now my boss won't stop yelling at me." And I remember being on that call, and that call took an hour to resolve. But the reality was, and this is what this book taught me, was instead of just trying to rush out and solve her problem and try and, relieve her of her stress, I just took a strategy from here, which is just active listening, which is not butting in, letting people get what they want off their chest so they can feel like they've been heard. And then at that point, you can kind of respond. And doing that, it took a while. Like I said, it took an hour to get there, but being able to do that and use that strategy actually calmed her down. So she started from wanting to almost chew someone's head off. But by the end of the call, she was thanking me for it, saying, "You should be a therapist or something." And I was just like, "I'm definitely not qualified for that." But, it's good to, I felt good knowing that, just the way that I responded to her, distress actually was a way to calm her down. And in the end, brought her back to a good, mindset and a good level. And, we just went over some, chatting and stuff like that. And in the end, she was really reasonable. It was just that she was caught in a real, negative spin. And through me incorporating or using the techniques in here, I actually managed to completely negate that spin and actually level her out. So I think this book is definitely what you want to pick up if you want to think about, human dynamics and how human beings interact with one another and how they affect each other. Now, the last book I've got for today is, goddamn, I love this book. So, Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity. And just look at this man, David Allen. Look at that cocaine smile. You know he's a winner. And, after reading this book, so will you be a winner too. So this book is about essentially organizational strategies and techniques that you can work into your life, both, with your emails, is just one avenue that you can look at. It's just emails. And he has pretty much a whole chapter on how you can break down your emails so that you never have an inbox that's full. Because before I read this book, I had an inbox of 3,000 unread emails. But by the end now, I have no unread emails in my inbox. All of them have been categorized and put into the specific folder. And I know people might go, "Oh, but then you've just got the problem of having a million folders and then how you navigate that." Where what he does is he addresses that by kind of having very centralized locations, but only having a few. So one is the reference folder. So you'll have a general reference folder, which is you put anything that isn't really specific or just something that you want to go back to later. I mean, he does a much better explanation in the book, but you'll have a general reference folder where it's just it could be something I don't know, the day your kid's, band recital is or soccer practice. I don't know what it is, right? What you do in your life. But, just general stuff that you want to come back to, you'll go to that. But then underneath that, you might have some really specific ones. So for me personally, I have general reference, but then I have general reference for financial stuff, and then general reference for employment-related matters. So that's where I put my letter of employment, emails between me and my employer and stuff like that, just so if I ever need to go back to it, I can get there really quickly. And another aspect is like, you might have one for contacts. So if you have, someone that you are in regular contact with, which is for me, my biostats kind of mentor, who is, that we kind of like, always have back and forth, exchanges. So I've got a specific kind of reference folder for that. So any conversations I have with him there, I can immediately go there and grab it. So that's just one aspect, so just about emails that we're talking about. But he also kind of talks about people struggling with getting things done because they tend to forget things. So, and that he attributes to them not writing it down, because he talks about these numbers of studies that if you actually write down the things that you have to do, so I don't know, like, take the dog to the groomers or something like that, if you write it down, you're much more likely to remember it, because when you don't write it down, essentially your brain is competing for memory space. So if you've got all these things that you're meant to be doing and you've got it stuck up in your head, eventually some of them are going to take over the others, like memory space, and it's going to get wiped. And then that's when, one day an event comes on and you're like, yeah, you were supposed to be here and you're supposed to do this thing, but you completely forgot about it. And it's not really your fault, but it's just that your brain does not have enough room to kind of keep that many interests or that many things all in your focus. So what he kind of talks about is like this external brain, which is where you have a kind of like a projects. Well, the way I've got it set up is I have a Word document on my computer where it's projects. So these are all things that will take more than one step. So for me, a perfect project is my master's degree. So that's the project, right? Finishing my master's is a project. But then what he also recommends is have another sheet called next actions, which is for every item on your projects list, you need a next action on your next actions kind of list. So for me, so let's take the example of my master's, I'll have that there on the projects, but the next action might be sign up to the next semester courses, or buy the textbook for that course, or when we're in the actual semester itself, do that quiz or read those notes. So it's kind of keeping all of that information in a location that is never going to get lost, and you're always going to have reference to. And there's a bunch of other strategies and other things that he talks about here, but I don't want to ruin it all, and plus I'll do a complete butchering of the explanation. But I think this is also another book that you should read, because a friend of mine recommended it to me and I was like, yeah, I'll go read it. But I never ended up going to do it for ages. And then my brother, he works as kind of like head up in KFC, Australia. And one of his kind of mentors gave him this book and was like, you should read this. This will be really good for you. And then one day he kind of my brother came to me and he was like, oh yeah, and I was reading this book, but I think you might like it. And then when he actually handed it to me, I was like, oh my God, this is the book that my other friend wanted me to read. So I was like, yeah, I'll read it. And then, man, the amount of efficiency gains I made in my life and just in my personal life, I feel like I captured back so much free time just because I knew where I was at, and I also knew where I needed to be going. So I think that's what this book can really offer you. It can really kind of help you take control of your life and get that direction back that you really need. So those are some 5 books that I recommend. I definitely have others that I do want to recommend in time, but I don't want to make this into a complete book review channel. This is just kind of get the ball rolling. I think these for me are just must reads that should be kind of looked into. But what we'll do at a later point, and we'll look at other topics. So if you do have questions or concerns, or you want me to something to think about, either through my blog or through these videos here, definitely leave a message or a comment either on my blog or on this video, just so that we can get some feedback going, because I want to see what you guys are interested in, and kind of so I can respond to that. But I'm also going to do things that I'm interested in as well, just to kind of give that balance, because talking about this kind of stuff I think is just really good, because a lot of the content out there can kind of be pretty vacuous, but I think something that builds not only you but me as well, because this for me personally serves as a reminder that I need to do these things, and this might teach you or tell you something that you didn't know. But for me, it's I'm trying to always remind myself, because I'm human just like anybody else. So I have moments where I fall and don't do things that I should be doing. But then what I always try and do is I always try and get back up on that horse. And so that's what these videos are trying to facilitate. And if you like it, like and subscribe, and leave a comment. Thanks so much.